Every photographer dreams of photographing the aurora, and that's why we're here in Iceland of all places, where this time of year, the northern lights tends to come out nearly every night on a clear sky day. Matt from B&H here, and we're here with Sigma as well to bring you a full guide on how to photograph the aurora. We'll cover everything from research and planning, which so much goes into photographing the aurora, gear and accessories, and then we'll head to one of Iceland's most famous waterfalls, where I'll show you the settings and composition and so much more on how to photograph the northern lights. So come join us. The first time I tried photographing the northern lights, I was 19 in Alaska, and I have to tell you, I was completely unprepared at the time. And although it was an amazing experience being able to witness the northern lights, I definitely wish I walked away with some photos at the time, which is why in this video I want to make sure that I help prevent you from having that same issue, which is where all the research and preparation comes in. All right, so we're at one of the most famous waterfalls in Iceland, of which there are so many here. This one is called, well, I'm not gonna try and pronounce it. We'll just put a title down below. Research is such a huge part of photographing the aurora. Kind of a bunch of aspects have to align in order to photograph it successfully. One of the biggest parts is being in the right place in order to actually see the aurora. So you wanna look for dark sky preserves, and you want to get as far north as possible because they are the northern lights and they tend to hug the North Pole. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to Iceland or even Alaska. You can probably even see them as far south as like upstate New York. Definitely many stretches in Canada can see them as well. And anywhere that it's really dark and you get a high KP rating, you might be in luck. Which brings us to the next point, the KP index rating. It starts from 0 and goes to 9, 0 being the most calm and 9 being a total geomagnetic storm. And you'll probably definitely see the lights unless you have a ton of light pollution in your area. Around 5 tends to be a little bit more typical, and in most clear nights in northern Alaska or Iceland, you'll probably see the northern lights. But you can't really see the northern lights if it's completely cloudy out, which is another huge consideration if you're planning to photograph the northern lights. Obviously, you can't plan for clouds months or sometimes even weeks in advance. And in Iceland, it changes every 10 to 20 minutes. But you want to have a nice clear sky, or at least some cloud coverage can be fine, as well as it adds more drama into your aurora photographs. But the best bet to see the lights is if you have a clear sky. One great app is the My Aurora app, where you can see the KP index, the cloud coverage in different locations, and some of the best locations that the northern lights are being seen right now. And there's also live webcams if you want to just watch some of the northern lights from your home. Also, if you could plan to photograph the aurora around when it's a new moon, that means that you'll probably see even more of the lights. They'll be much more emphasized in the sky as opposed to your foreground, which if you have a full moon, then the full moon will help to light up the foreground. So it's just kind of a balance, and if you're looking to maybe photograph something as epic as this, then a full moon might be nice, as it will act as a huge soft light to light your scene while you have the aurora dancing in the background. So right now I have my composition pretty much set. So how do you know if a location is good to photograph the northern lights? Well, one of the best ways is just showing up and scouting it in the daylight, checking out and picking a composition and making sure that you're choosing a north-facing location so that you know that the lights will be dancing in the north part of the sky. So now that you know how to prepare to photograph the aurora, the next part comes with gear and accessories, which we should talk about now as we wait for the lights to come out. So let's go to a nice warm climate for that to happen. All right, now that we're inside and nice and warm, let's talk about some of the gear and accessories needed for the Aurora. And the best part about photographing the Aurora is that it doesn't actually require that much gear. It's pretty pared down here, although I'm gonna show you some extra accessories that perhaps you wanna take along to get a time lapse or for backing things up afterwards. Although if you wanna see even more of our gear and accessories for astrophotography and landscape photography, you can check out both of those episodes where we go even more in depth. On the camera side, I have a Sony a7R5 as my primary camera. It is 60 megapixels, and most people say that shooting a high megapixel camera isn't as great with low light, but I trust it with low light. The ISO, even when I'm cranking it pretty high, I don't get very noisy images, and I'd much rather have a very detailed image. Also, I have the A7CR kind of as a backup camera, or if I want to do like time lapses or something like that. And this is also 60 megapixels. It's so tiny, small form factor, and it's great for travel photography. On the lens side, of course, I have two of my favorite Sigma lenses, the Sigma 14 to 24 millimeter f2.8 DG DN art lens and the Sigma 14 millimeter prime 1.4 DG DN art lens. So amazing for astrophotography. Even at 2.8, the 14 to 24 excels. But of course, having even more light with the 1.4 lens, you can lower that ISO and get an even cleaner image. Both of these lenses are really well made in Japan and they're weather resistant. If a hailstorm tends to come, we're in Iceland, the weather changes every 10 minutes, you know that you'll be in perfect condition. And now moving on to what I consider to be one of the most important parts about photographing the Aurora is having a nice, sturdy tripod. This is a Gitzo carbon fiber tripod. It'll withstand the elements, and we are in Iceland with wind gusts up to 40 to 50 miles per hour, and I feel every bit of those wind gusts. So having a sturdy tripod is crucial so that when you're shooting those long exposures, your camera won't shake. This was one of my biggest problems when photographing the Aurora for the first time. I had a very cheap tripod, if I'm being honest, and it was completely blowing in the wind and I could not get a good long exposure. So I know that it's annoying when you are spending money on cameras and lenses and you're like, do I really have to shell out even more money for a good sturdy tripod? But it all comes down to a tripod in a lot of ways to make sure that your images are steady. Moving on from there, I also have a Tether Tools power bank with this nifty little sleeve that I could put on the tripod as well. This will help power my camera throughout the night so that I could shoot endlessly, which I tend to do when I'm taking photos. This will ensure that your camera is powered all night, and paired with that, I have the Tether Tools on-site relay system that basically just works as placing a dummy battery into the camera, and then I could switch the power source throughout the night and plug it into the Tether Tools, and I'm good especially for time lapses. Because time lapses, you're just shooting endless photos and you want to make sure that your camera is powered throughout that entire time. And then lastly, but perhaps the most important part, is a headlamp. And we had a full moon here around this time of year, and also the stars have been pretty bright, so I haven't been really using the headlamp. And you want to be careful if you're photographing with other people that you're not messing up with their images. A headlamp is crucial so that you can navigate your camera and see where you're walking, because if you're photographing the northern lights, of course, it's going to be pretty dark out. Moving on from there, I also have these accessories that I did expand on in my other videos as well, but this is a Pelican ruck case, which I like to have any valuables in here, like hard drives, SSDs, maybe other kind of readers, hard drive readers, and things of that nature. And this is waterproof and dustproof, and it can handle all the elements that Iceland is throwing at us this week, so I highly recommend including it in your kit. But I don't know about you guys, I'm ready to head out and photograph the Aurora. So let's go ahead and talk about some settings. All right, the sunlight is officially off, and guess what? The northern lights are on. We were sitting in the car trying to warm up for a bit after we scouted the location and everything. We were getting a little bit nervous that maybe the lights weren't going to show up despite all of the research that we did do to make sure that they were hopefully going to be here, but you just can never be 100% sure. And sure enough, when we saw them dancing from the car windshield, we ran out here and we had our composition already set, so we were prepared to get some really fantastic photos. Just a little background, the green that you often see in Northern Lights photos is from sun particles interacting with oxygen in the atmosphere. And we're looking out with some purple in our photos as well, which is actually interactions with nitrogen. Just a little science for you if anyone's interested, but I know you guys are photography nerds, so you probably don't care very much. Moving on to settings. So for my settings, I am switching between the Sigma 14-24 and the 14mm prime. So I started with an f2.8, which is perfectly fine for so many Aurora photos. And I was able to capture the entire scene with no problem. And I had my ISO around 2000 and my shutter speed around 10 seconds. To figure out exactly what shutter speed you should use, you want to try using the 300 rule, which is similar in astrophotography. It means that you divide your focal length by 300. So 300 divided by your focal length. If you want an even more specific number, then you could use the PhotoPills app. You dial in all of the aspects of your camera, like your sensor, which also dictates which shutter speed you should use, and it'll tell you exactly what shutter speed to be at. But around 10 seconds tends to be a good option for 14mm to 24. For my white balance, I'm going between 3000 and 4000. It's really personal preference, and shooting in RAW means that I could change this in post-processing. So it's completely up to you. Play with it, see what you like, and it's hard not to like all the photos that you're gonna take out here. If you are having a hard time getting your foreground or whatever is in your scene in good exposure because you're trying to expose for the Aurora, well, then you could always blend a composition from earlier in that day, or you could just try and take 2 exposures, one for your foreground, and if you have to, you can light it with like a headlamp or something, and then expose for the Aurora. You may have to adjust your ISO depending on the Aurora and how intense it is, and also depending on how intense the moon is, because we have a pretty bright scene here right now that we are able to use much lower ISO. It's really hard to use any kind of autofocusing system in this dark of conditions, so just switch right over to manual focus. It's not as intimidating as it may seem. All you have to do is find even a start point and adjust the focus until that start point is as small as possible. It goes from a massive sort of blob to a really sharp point, and then you know that you have the perfect focus. But not only do we have the northern lights right now, this composition also is perfect for astrophotography. We have beautiful northern lights with the stars behind it, making for the perfect composition. It's seriously so fantastic to be out here in Iceland. My first time shooting the Aurora, I didn't have the right gear. My tripod was basically toppling over with my camera on it. And honestly, it just left me to enjoy the moment, which I also got to do tonight. But this time I'm walking away with some great photos as well. Being here with B&H and Sigma, shooting on some of the best cameras and on some of the finest glass, makes it all worth it being a photographer and being able to photograph the Northern Lights. Well, with all that said, I hope that this inspired you to go out there and photograph the Northern Lights. If you have any questions on anything that we covered in this video, any of the Sigma gear, any of the settings that we used, let us know in the comments below. My name is Matt, and thanks for watching.
Are you following me?
Just hanging back here.
Get your own composition.
I was heading that way anyways.
Yeah.